Hello and welcome to Prairie Pulse. I'm John Harris. Coming up later in the show, we'll profile Christopher Zimmerman, who's among the finalists for the Fargo-Moorhead Symphony Orchestra Conductor Search. But first, Matt O'Lean interviews UND Aerospace professor, Dr. Alan Fraser.
Welcome to Prairie Pulse. I'm Matt O'Lean. My guest today is Alan Fraser. He's a professor with the University of North Dakota Aerospace Department in Grand Forks. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for having me. I look forward to the opportunity to talking with your audience about this program.
Yeah, unmanned aircraft is what we're going to be talking about. But first, tell us about yourself, your background, where you're from originally, and how you got to UND.
Well, I'm originally from Tennessee, and then I went out to California for about 30 years, and I worked for a police department out there as a law enforcement officer. Spent a big part of that time working air support, flying helicopters, and supervising an air support unit. And then I got ready to retire and began looking for kind of a post-retirement job. I wasn't ready to finish working, and I was fortunate enough to be hired by the University of North Dakota, and I teach aviation courses there, primarily helicopter courses, which is my background, but I also teach a course in public safety aviation, which looks at police, fire, and resource protection aviation. And then my research project, the research I'm currently working on, is the integration of small unmanned aircraft in law enforcement.
Mm-hmm. And you've got something right here. What are we looking at?
Yes,
here?
This is the Dragonflyer X6. It's manufactured by a company in Canada called Dragonfly Innovations, and it's a small unmanned aircraft with an off-the-shelf camera on it. And this is one of the aircraft that we utilize in the project.
Amazing. And they're so small, but yet they can do so many things. Tell us about what they do and what the technology is like.
Well, I think what they do is kind of limited by the imagination of the users. Although unmanned aircraft have been around for quite a few years, the application to public safety and law enforcement is rather new. In fact, we're one of the only 9 projects in the nation that are utilizing small unmanned aircraft. But what we anticipate using them for through a partnership is basically for public safety. I would imagine things like post-disaster assessments, the overland flooding that we frequently get here in North Dakota, being able to assess that and what areas are at risk, how quickly the floodwaters are rising. Potentially a hazardous materials situation where maybe a train has derailed and some type of a hazardous material is spilling. We would be able to put the aircraft up over that without endangering public safety workers and be able to look at the extent of that spill and if there were waterways that were endangered by the spill, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. And you're involved with the Grand Forks Sheriff's Office, correct? Tell us about that.
We are, yes. It's a 3-way partnership between the University of North Dakota, the Grand Forks Sheriff's Department, and actually 3 aircraft manufacturers. So the aircraft that we just looked at is from Dragonfly Innovations, but we also have industry partners with AeroVironment, which is based in California, and also United Technologies, which is based out of the Minneapolis area.
This stuff is really, the technology has really advanced in the last 5 or 10 years, isn't that right, Alan? I mean, it's just been amazing. That's all we hear about now is unmanned aircraft and drones and this and that.
Absolutely. It's moved forward domestically quite a bit. Again, with the Department of Defense, they've been in use for better than 15 years. But I think a lot of the newsworthiness of it is coming from the fact that now we're seeing civilian applications for it and it's being integrated into domestic use.
Mm-hmm. What type of aircraft are we talking about and what are their capabilities?
Well, one of them in the project is the aircraft we just looked at. That is a 6-rotor helicopter. It's capable of flying up to about 12,000 feet, but that just would not fit with our project. So our authorization from the Federal Aviation Administration allows us to fly it up to 400 feet above ground level. It has 6 brushless electric motors, and it's powered by a lithium polymer battery. And that battery gives it a mission duration of about 15 minutes. So it's not a long duration vehicle. It's something that we would need to carefully plan out what we wanted to do with it, launch the aircraft, capture the images that were necessary, and then recover the aircraft fairly quickly.
And what types of situations would this be used in? You talk about law enforcement, things like that, but I mean, how does that work?
Well, initially, as I said, I see the applications being public safety, so assessment of disaster scenes, that type of thing. But I can envision it being actually used for law enforcement purposes. And it would be a resource that we would use for very serious incidents. For instance, a serious felon suspect who was barricaded.
On the run or something, maybe?
Probably not as much
Okay.
on the run, but barricaded. Let's
Okay.
say that there was a bank robbery or an armed standoff, and special weapons officers had been dispatched to that location. That would be the type of situation that we would utilize it in, and it would help us maintain a perimeter around that location in case the suspect tried to escape, and also help us gather information on the safest way for law enforcement officers to approach that location and take the suspect safely into custody.
And what types of authorizations, Alan, are required to fly unmanned aircraft?
Well, there's multiple layers of authorizations. The first one comes from the Federal Aviation Administration, and they issue a certificate of authorization. And again, only 9 law enforcement agencies in the nation possess those now. And that's a rather lengthy process. You apply online. Numerous questions are asked about the qualifications of the pilot, the capabilities of the aircraft, the specific geographic area that you're going to be flying in, the nature of your mission, that type of thing. The process takes anywhere from 60 to 120 days. And at the conclusion of it, if the FAA is satisfied with your safety and mission profile and so forth, then they issue the certificate of authorization. And it is very specific. It's specific to the aircraft make and model, to the qualifications of the pilot, and to the geographic area that the aircraft is flown in.
Mm-hmm. And how is safety addressed in the project, Alan?
Well, initially, it's vetted by the FAA, so there's an extensive part of the application that deals with a safety analysis of the aircraft. Additionally, in our project, we have 2 additional layers of safety. One is that we enjoy the fact that we're flying within the Odegaard School of Aerospace Sciences. So we have a long history of operating manned aircraft. In fact, we operate over 130 airframes out of the Grand Forks location. There are extensive safety policies and procedures that are in place, and when we began this project, we began it with the understanding that we would create unmanned aircraft specific safety policies, and we have done that, and they've been integrated into our normal policies and procedures for operation of all aircraft at the Odegaard School.
And what safeguards are in place to protect the public's privacy? Because I know that gets to be an issue with, you know, drones or unmanned aircraft, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Let me preface that with explaining to the audience that this is not something that's going to be placed on routine patrol. The aircraft really don't have that capability, nor do we have the personnel to be able to dedicate to a routine type of patrol. It's really going to involve tactical deployments. So we would only put it over a disaster scene or put it over a serious crime scene and orbit or operate in that immediate area. Wouldn't be used to patrol. But again, we have multiple layers of privacy protection there. We have an extensive policy at the Grand Forks Sheriff's Office that deals specifically with unmanned aircraft. That policy prohibits the use of the aircraft to look at non-essential areas that's not involved in a serious crime scene or not involved in a disaster scene. In addition to that, the University of North Dakota in November stood up what is called the Unmanned Aircraft Research Compliance Committee. Quite a mouthful there. But that is a 15-member committee, and it consists of both community members, public safety members, and members from the community at large. And that committee reviews, vets, and approves or disapproves any type of research done with unmanned aircraft. And the principal area of concern currently with that committee, of course, is privacy, because it's so much on the public's mind. And so currently, mission sets, different types of missions that we would fly in this project, are being reviewed by that committee. 2 of the mission sets have been approved, and 3 other mission sets are pending before that committee. So that's really, if you will, that's our conscience, that's our litmus test for protecting the public's privacy, is the vetting and approval or disapproval of mission sets through that committee.
And what are the goals of the UND portion of this research program?
Well, hopefully what we'll be able to do at the conclusion of it, and it's scheduled to conclude in January of 2015, is that we'll be able to create a white paper that would be a how-to guide for public safety agencies, not only law enforcement agencies, but fire and search and rescue organizations on how to implement their own small unmanned aircraft program. In addition to that, we have already created a sensor system operator program. In fact, we're putting on a course March 11th through the 13th for local public safety agencies to train their personnel about how to use the sensor systems aboard the aircraft and how to assist the pilot in clearing the airspace so that we're not a hazard to manned aircraft. So, and a final goal that we have is to create a concept of operations for the operation of these aircraft. What we hope to find is what they can do and just as importantly, what they cannot do, and pass that information on to public safety agencies so they can determine whether the technology is appropriate for their organization.
And who are the pilots that are involved in this, Alan?
I have 3 pilots and myself. Two of the pilots are UND graduates. They currently serve as flight instructors for us. The third individual works for a contractor who's currently contracting to Customs and Border Protection, and he works as a mission planner. Very well educated. All of them have backgrounds in aviation. All of them are very accomplished pilots. Cumulatively, we have over 10,000 hours of manned aircraft experience. And all of those pilots have received factory training from the companies that manufacture the aircraft that we utilize. And we do quarterly training, and that quarterly training is focused on things like privacy and safe operation of the aircraft over simulated public safety incidents.
And what role will the law enforcement agencies and the officers play in this?
They will really be the eyes and ears for those fire departments and police departments. And so this course that we're offering in March is the second time we've offered that course. The goal is that any agency that we go out to assist will have their own firefighter or sheriff or police officer that's trained to be a sensor system operator. And they will work as part of a 2-person team with the pilot. Not to undermine what the pilots do, but we kind of think of ourselves as glorified taxi drivers. Our job is to get that aircraft to where that firefighter or that law enforcement officer needs it to be, and then that individual will direct the camera, determine what images are captured, and also serve as the guardian of that information, safeguarding it, utilizing normal evidence procedures that are present in their organization.
That was my next question. Who safeguards the images that are taken? How do they get processed? That kind of thing.
Absolutely. The client safeguards those, which for law enforcement agencies is a fairly simple adaptation of their normal evidence policies that any law enforcement agency would have in place as written policies. Within our Grand Forks Sheriff's Department policy, we have a section that deals solely with that and unmanned aircraft images, and it emphasizes minimization, and that is we're only going to turn the camera on when we believe that we need to capture essential images, and any images that we then determine after the flight are not essential to our operation will be immediately deleted, so that we're not going to be archiving information that is not necessary for that particular mission that we're trying to accomplish.
Is the program up and running now, or is it still in the research phase?
We're just about to kick it off.
Okay.
We're hoping in the first week of February, when we get final approval from the UND committee, that we'll begin flying a couple of different types of missions. So it would be disaster assessment and crime and traffic accident scene analysis, where we're helping investigators by taking aerial images of serious traffic accidents and serious crime scenes.
As you know, Alan, when the public hears unmanned aircraft or drones, they might think of something different. They might think of, targeting people overseas, as been happened, sometimes American citizens. What are your thoughts about how they've been used or how they can be used in the future, and how do you educate the public as to what's really going on here in Grand Forks?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, what the Department of Defense is using in theater in places like Afghanistan compared to what we're using here is really apples and oranges.
Right.
I can see how the public would draw that comparison, but it's important to understand that our aircraft are much less capable as far as mission duration, payloads that they can carry. They're absolutely unarmed. In fact, our policy prohibits any type of arming of unmanned aircraft, and we believe that that's an appropriate policy for any law enforcement agency. That technology is not appropriate for the utilization of domestic unmanned aircraft.
Do you think this is going to revolutionize law enforcement in the future, or could it?
Well, I think revolutionize might be a little
Okay.
strong. It definitely is a great technology, but I look at it as many of the technologies that we already have. Probably a good example, although it's a weapon, would be a taser, you know, a small electrical stunning device. That hasn't revolutionized law enforcement, but it's made law enforcement safer, not only for the officers, but for the public. It allows officers to take suspects into custody utilizing a lower level of force in many cases, and so it's even safer for the accused person. And that's how I look at these aircraft, is that we focus a lot on officer safety and that this will make it a safer environment for law enforcement officers. But it will also make it a safer environment for the public because it will allow law enforcement agencies to take potentially violent suspects into custody more rapidly. And it's even makes it safer for those suspects because we're able to gather more information about that suspect. For instance, if a suspect fled from a vehicle at the end of a law enforcement vehicle pursuit into a cornfield here in North Dakota, and the law enforcement agency was able to contain that suspect within that cornfield, and then summoned this resource, and we were able to get up over there and see that it was relatively clear to us that the suspect was not armed with a firearm, that is going to a great degree change the manner in which law enforcement is going to search for that suspect. It's going to, if you will, calm the waters, oil on waters, so that the officers aren't going into that field to try to apprehend the suspect, believing that the suspect is armed with a firearm. Therefore, it's going to be a safer environment for that suspect when they're taken into custody. So I really believe that the technology has the ability to make it safer for everyone involved in a case.
Now, one thing we don't know yet, Alan, is court proceedings. Evidence gathered in an unmanned aircraft of a suspect or a crime scene, and how that will be admissible in court or not admissible. I assume there'll be lawyers lined up to challenge these kind of things in court. We don't know that yet, do we? And how do you see that going?
Well, I think what we have to do now, you're absolutely correct, Matt, that there are no current cases working their way through the court system that I'm aware of nationwide that involve the use of unmanned aircraft in law enforcement. However, we can go back and rely upon some aerial search cases involving manned aircraft. And there are a few bright line cases on that that have been made their way all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And those cases indicate that if the aircraft is in navigable airspace, and currently the Supreme Court seems to believe that's about 400 feet above ground level.
Okay.
And so if images are taken from 400 feet above ground level or higher, the Supreme Court has indicated in manned aircraft cases that those are admissible and do not constitute a violation of the Fourth Amendment. I would imagine that at least in the early stages of this, that courts would rely upon those manned aircraft search cases until, and I agree with you, I think these cases in the relatively near future are going to start making themselves present in the court system and potentially the subject of appeals that may start working their way up through the appellate courts and the Supreme Court. But until that happens, and that's probably going to be at least a couple of years on down the road before a court filters it all the way up through that chain, I think we have to rely upon those manned aircraft cases.
Got about a minute left, Alan. What kind of career opportunities are there for your students involved in this stuff? And then tell people how they can learn more about it through a website or something like that.
Absolutely. I think the career opportunities are huge. We have a degree program at the University of North Dakota that is focused on the operation of unmanned aircraft. We've graduated approximately 50 students to date, and at over half of those students were immediately employed. And then many others are getting job opportunities from multiple employers. Anyone that's interested in unmanned aircraft as a career or manned aircraft as a career, we would welcome your inquiries at the University of North Dakota.
Alan Fraser, thank you so much for being on Prairie Pulse.
Thank you for having me, Matt.
Our guest has been Alan Fraser, UND aerospace professor. Stay tuned for more.
Conductor Christopher Zimmerman has led numerous orchestras throughout the world, including the London Symphony Orchestra and orchestras in China as well. In 2011, he was announced as first prize winner of the American Conducting Prize in the Professional Orchestra category. Recently, Zimmerman brought his talents to North Dakota as a finalist in the Fargo-Moorhead Symphony Orchestra's Conductor Search.
Perfect intonation, great. This word classical music, you know, it has a certain intimidation maybe attached to it. And indeed, a lot of the music we play is, I mean, the art form is sophisticated, it's quite complicated. It doesn't mean that what it is can't really reach people. I mean, it is beautiful stuff. I grew up in England, just in London, basically, just south of London. I was interested in music at a pretty early age, although, you know, like most kids, I was into pop music, but I grew up hearing classical music all the time. You have the pulse, bum, ba, ba, bum, ba, ba, bum, ba, ba, bum. They have to be able to listen to that, so that has to be completely clean. And then they'll be together. And similarly, bum, 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 bim, bum, bum will come from that. I think it was when I was 11, my dad bought me a record of Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto. He said, well, just try it. And I actually completely fell in love with it. I mean, that's how I got into classical music. I really fell in love with this. And I was playing piano at the time and I started violin. So I knew that I wanted to be in music somehow. And when I came to college as an undergrad, I pursued violin and piano and also music as a whole, history, theory and all that. And then I got bitten by the bug at some point of wanting to conduct. The most important part of conducting, it may sound silly or it may sound trite, but it's true, I think, is the ability to actually listen. You're constantly giving out signals, but what you need to do is listen to the response. Although I have a very strong opinion or idea, let's say, or interpretation about how Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony goes, I don't impose that willy-nilly on every orchestra that I conduct. It's like cooking something, right? You know, you put something together based on the ingredients you have. So I listen to what they do and I kind of adapt my thoughts to what they do because I want to get the best response as a whole. So there is a collaborative element to that. Yeah, good. So are you doing pam pim or your same bow? Okay. The group seems to have a unified sense within itself, which is very nice to work with. People obviously played a lot together. Crescendos, crescendos, yes. And there's also, I think, a sense of camaraderie within the group, which is also important. I do feel that they're responding quite enthusiastically, so I'm hoping, you know, that it'll keep building and that the concerts will be good. I was asked by Linda Boyd, the executive director, to, I think, give 2 different programs, which would be a program of music that I feel very passionate about and obviously feel that I can clearly interpret and communicate with. But the other part, which is important, is that the program itself has some sort of internal balance, which in fact I believe this one does. And that there is and this is very important to me, there is a real diversity within the program. It's really hard if someone's not into classical music to say, come to this concert and it's, you know, Brahms' Second Symphony, and that they go away completely transformed. I mean, I think that's difficult. But I think if you give them a program of Shostakovich Symphony and John Adams or something, that there's a real chance that at least part of that music will really strike a chord. I don't think it's necessarily the right thing to do to just introduce a kid, let's say, or an adult who doesn't know anything about this sort of music, say, listen to this Mozart piece and try and make them love that and then move forward. I think it's easier the other way around. I think it's easier or makes more sense to introduce them to symphonic music, orchestral music, which is being written right now, which I think they're going to be more likely to be, they're more likely to relate to because it's about today and it's music written today. And if you can get them involved in that, then go back to the old masters. There's a wealth of this music which is really diverse and really great. The orchestra which I'm with at the moment is not actually a completely full-time position. And what is attractive about it is that there's a real potential there for someone coming in to actually improve, not just the quality of the music necessarily, that's probably the most important part of the job and in a way one of the most fun parts, but just to get the orchestra, you know, more known in the community and you know, out there as a really good product which people are really excited about. It looked like this position was very similar, so I would like to try my hand here as well.
The Fargo-Moorhead Symphony is searching for its next music director. This season, our Masterworks concerts will each be led by one of the 5 finalists. The decision of who will be the next artistic leader will involve valuable input from the orchestra musicians, audience members, symphony supporters, students, and members of the community, including you. The countdown begins. Who will be the Fargo-Moorhead Symphony's next conductor?
Well, that's all we have on Prairie Pulse for this week, and as always, thanks for watching.
Funded in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008. North Dakota Council on the Arts, and by the members of Prairie Public.